My father burned my notebook of shelter numbers in front of the whole family, then pointed at me and said, "You're a cancer that needs to be cut out." When I begged him to stop the wedding, he just announced, "The wedding is tomorrow." I stayed silent. That was a year ago. Yesterday, he was staring at me across the courtroom as they read the guilty verdict. In my family, girls were married off the moment they got their first period. Didn't matter if you were 12, 13, or 14. The blood meant you were ready for a husband at least 3 times your age. I grew up with this idea, so in my head it didn't seem that bad, until I turned 11, because that's when I watched my cousin Miriam get promised to a 43-year-old man just 3 days after her first period. His previous 2 wives had died before turning 20. That was the first night I decided to stop eating enough food. Not because I was fat, and not because I hated food, but because I noticed the skinnier girls in my family would be the last ones to get their period, and I knew it was my only option. I later learned that your body actually needs to have enough fat before starting puberty, lol. The other girls called me skeleton, but I didn't care. Other girls my age were already promised to men who had children older than them. That didn't mean they stopped prepping me to be a wife, though. Every Friday from 1 a.m. to 10 a.m., I was made to serve meals to male family members for hours without speaking. And of course, if I made eye contact or noise while serving, then I would receive 10 lashes of the belt. I was forced to hold burning pots without oven mitts to toughen up soft hands for kitchen work. And every night, my mom put skin whitening cream all over my face so I could be beautiful. And other than the secret starvation, I was the perfect daughter. I played the part with 0 complaints and always talked about how excited I was to have kids. But when I was 14 and still periodless, I found something that changed everything. For context, we were in the USA the whole time, lol. My mom had just convinced us that all of this was normal, and that any girl who didn't do this was bound to die alone, as well as being ugly and useless. Until one teacher forced me to have a meeting with her, because I had accidentally worn a t-shirt to school, and she saw how skinny I was. When she walked out to go to the bathroom, she had forgotten to lock her drawer. Inside were books about marriage laws, pamphlets with titles like Your Rights as a Young Teenager and When Culture Becomes Crime. As I read, my jaw dropped. It was the first time I had been introduced to the idea that marriage under 18 was wrong. No cultural exceptions, no parental consent loopholes. I stole the thinnest pamphlet, hiding it in my waistband. Over the next few weeks, when my parents thought I was asleep, I memorized every page. Phone numbers for CPS, shelter addresses, the exact words that would trigger a mandatory report. I learned that teachers, counselors, and doctors had to report suspected abuse by law. So I started a wife skills group in my uncle's tool shed. 6 younger cousins who hadn't bled yet, all desperate to avoid their fate. There, I taught them what I'd learned. Which teachers were mandated reporters. How to say the words that would trigger an investigation. We practiced in whispers. They're forcing me to marry. I'm only 13. Please help. And at 15, my body betrayed me. The blood came during morning food prep, soaking through my white dress. My mother's scream of joy brought every woman in the house running. They were practically beaming with joy, kissed my cheeks, told me I was lucky. By nightfall, my father had already chosen my husband, Hamoud Habibi, a construction mogul who'd buried 2 of his wives once they turned 23. Kidney failure, the death certificate said. The women whispered it was from too many pregnancies too young. 2 days later, my cousin Anya, a girl from the shed, got her period too. Within hours, she was promised to a 51-year-old who collected wives like trophies, who had 8 children older than her. I watched the light drain from her eyes as they discussed her bride price like she was livestock. That night, I slipped her my notebook. Every shelter number, every legal fact, every escape route I'd memorized. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "tell the science teacher. Use the exact words I taught you." Her hands shook as she took it. "What about you?" "My wedding's not for 2 weeks. I'll figure something out," I responded, voice shaking. But I was wrong, because that night there was a knock at the door. It was CPS. My father's face went from confusion to fury as they asked about Anya, about underage brides, about forced marriages. They needed to speak to all the girls in the family under 18. The moment they left, the family circled like wolves. In their eyes, someone had been teaching the girls lies. Someone had poisoned their innocent minds with Western propaganda. They turned the house upside down, looking for the culprit. Well, my journal was found hidden in the tool shed within an hour, and it was filled with phone numbers and legal statutes. My father burned it in front of everyone while calling me diseased, contaminated, and, my personal favorite, a cancer that needed to be cut out. "The wedding is tomorrow," he announced, "before she destroys anyone else." Dawn came too fast. In an hour, they would come to dress me in red and gold, to deliver me to a man who'd unalived 2 girls already. But as they opened my bedroom door, they found my science teacher standing there, with 2 police officers, and a federal agent. Because here's what nobody knew. My teacher hadn't forgotten to lock her drawer. She'd been building a case against our family for 3 years, documenting every bruise, every underweight girl, every suspicious trip back home where cousins disappeared. And I wasn't her informant. My mother was. The room fell silent except for my mother's sharp intake of breath. My father's face twisted with rage as he stepped forward, but the federal agent raised her hand. "Mr. Hassan, I'm Agent Martinez with the Department of Justice. We have evidence of multiple violations of federal law occurring in this household." She pulled out a thick folder. "We need to speak with your daughter privately." My legs trembled as I stood there in my white nightgown, the same one I'd worn since I was 12. My father's eyes burned into me, promising retribution, but my mother moved between us, her hand finding mine behind her back. 3 quick squeezes, our old signal from when I was little. The science teacher, Ms. Chen, stepped closer to me. "We're taking her to the station for her safety. You can contact your lawyer." My uncles burst through the door, drawn by the commotion. Uncle Rashid, the eldest, surveyed the scene with calculating eyes. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" "Sir, please step back," one of the officers warned. The house erupted. Aunts screaming about dishonor, cousins peering from doorways, my grandmother wailing about the family's reputation. Through it all, my mother remained silent, her grip on my hand steady. Agent Martinez nodded to the officers. They moved to escort me out, but my father lunged forward. "She stays. This is family business." The officers restrained him as Ms. Chen wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. "Get your things, sweetheart, just essentials." I grabbed the small bag I'd hidden under my bed weeks ago. 3 changes of clothes, the money I'd saved from selling embroidery at the mosque, and a photo of Miriam from before her marriage. My hands shook as I zipped it closed. In the hallway, I passed Anya's room. She stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to hug her, tell her she'd saved us both, but there was no time. time. The officers were already guiding me toward the stairs. My father broke free and grabbed my arm at the bottom of the staircase. His fingers dug deep enough to bruise. "You destroy everything you touch," he hissed in Arabic. "Hamoud will straighten you out when we get you back." The officer pulled him off me, but his words echoed in my head. "When we get you back, not if." Outside, neighbors had gathered on their lawns. Some whispered behind their hands, others stared openly. The Ahmeds from next door looked shocked. They'd always complimented my father on raising such obedient daughters. As they guided me to the police car, my mother suddenly pushed past everyone. She cupped my face in her hands, and for the first time in years, I saw tears in her eyes. She whispered something in Arabic, too quiet for others to hear. "The tool shed. Under the floorboard. Everything you need." Then louder, "For the family's benefit. How could you shame us like this?" But her eyes told a different story. They begged me to understand, to play along one more time. The car door closed between us. As we pulled away, I watched my family's house grow smaller. My father stood on the porch, already on his phone, probably calling the family lawyer, or worse, calling Hamoud to move up the wedding even more. At the station, they put me in a small room with soft chairs and a box of tissues. Ms. Chen sat across from me while Agent Martinez set up a recorder. "I know this is overwhelming," Ms. Chen said gently, "but we need to document everything. Your mother has been helping us, but we need your testimony too." My mind reeled. How long had my mother been planning this? All those years of watching her enforce the rules, apply the whitening cream, supervise the Friday morning service training. Had it all been an act? I started talking about the marriages, the training, the punishments, about watching cousin after cousin disappear into houses they'd never leave, about Miriam, who'd had 3 miscarriages by 15 and died during the 4th pregnancy. They'd called it God's will. Agent Martinez took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I mentioned the tool shed meetings, she leaned forward. "Tell me more about that." I explained about teaching the younger girls their rights, about the pamphlets I'd stolen, about the escape routes I'd memorized but never used. My voice cracked when I talked about Anya, how brave she'd been to make that call. "She's safe," Ms. Chen assured me. "We removed her from the home this morning before coming for you." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by fear. What about the others? My cousins Fatima and Layla. They're only 11 and 12, and Sarah just turned 13 last month. "We're working on it," Agent Martinez said, "but these cases are complicated. We need solid evidence of imminent harm." Imminent harm? I almost laughed. Every day in that house was harmful. Every Friday morning session, every burning pot, every reminder that our bodies were property to be sold. They asked about other families in the community. I named names, addresses. The girls I knew were at risk. The Hassans down the street had 4 daughters. The youngest, Amira, had confided in me at the mosque that she'd started hiding sanitary pads, terrified of what would happen when her family found out she'd gotten her period. Hours passed. They brought me water and sandwiches, but I couldn't eat. My stomach churned with worry about what was happening at home. Were they searching for more evidence of my corruption? Were they interrogating the other girls? Finally, a social worker arrived. Mrs. Patterson had kind eyes and spoke softly about temporary placement, foster care, safety plans. The words blurred together. All I could think about was my mother's whispered message, the tool shed, under the floorboard. "Can I ask about my mom?" I interrupted. Is she in trouble?" Agent Martinez and Ms. Chen exchanged glances. "Your mother has been invaluable to our investigation. She's been documenting evidence for years, taking photos, recording conversations when it was safe. She took enormous risks to protect you and the other girls." My chest tightened. All those times she'd seemed so harsh, so traditional. The skin whitening cream that never actually worked because she'd diluted it. The way she'd always volunteer to supervise my Friday training but would let me rest when the men weren't looking. The small rebellions I'd thought were just maternal softness. "What happens now?" I asked. Mrs. Patterson explained about emergency custody, court hearings, protection orders, but I barely heard her. My mind was spinning with questions. How many girls could we save? Would my father find a way to drag me back? What about Hamoud, who'd already paid a bride price? That night, they placed me in an emergency shelter. The room was small but clean, with a lock on the door that I controlled. I sat on the narrow bed, still wearing the clothes Ms. Chen had given me, and tried to process everything. My phone, which they'd returned after checking it, buzzed with messages. Dozens from family members, some pleading, some threatening, all demanding I come home and stop this madness. I deleted them without reading, but one name made me pause. Cousin Noor, who'd been married at 14 and widowed at 17. Her message was short. "You gave us hope. Stay strong." I thought about all the girls still trapped, the ones who'd have their periods tomorrow, next week, next month, the ones whose fathers were probably arranging marriages right now, spooked by the investigation, moving up timelines just like mine had been. The next morning, Mrs. Patterson took me to a different facility, a group home for girls in protective custody. The drive was long, winding through neighborhoods I'd never seen. She explained that distance was necessary for safety. The house looked normal from the outside. Inside, I met Sarah, the house manager, who showed me around. Kitchen, common room, study area. Other girls lived there too, each with their own story of escape. "You'll be safe here," Sarah assured me. "We have security protocols, and your location is confidential." But I knew my father. He had connections, money, determination, and worse, he had religious conviction that what he was doing was right, that I was the one who'd strayed from the path. That afternoon, Agent Martinez called. They'd executed search warrants on multiple homes, including ours. "We found extensive documentation in your mother's hiding spots. Financial records of bride prices, medical records showing abuse, photos of injuries. Your mother was meticulous." My throat tightened. "Is she okay?" "She's in protective custody as well. She wanted me to tell you she's proud of you." I broke down then, sobbing for the mother I'd thought I'd lost to tradition, for the years we'd both pretended, for all the girls we couldn't save in time. Over the next days, I settled into a routine. Online schooling, therapy sessions, legal meetings. The prosecutor explained that multiple family members would likely face charges: human trafficking, child abuse, forced marriage. But I also knew the reality. Good lawyers, cultural defenses, claims of religious freedom. Some would walk free, some would get minimal sentences. And somewhere, in other houses, other girls were still serving breakfast in silence, still burning their hands on pots, still counting down to their first period like a death sentence. Ms. Chen visited regularly, bringing schoolwork and updates. Anya was doing well in her placement. 3 other cousins had been removed from homes, but others had vanished, whisked away to stay with relatives in other states, or back to countries where child marriage was still legal. 2 weeks into my stay, Sarah knocked on my door. "You have a approved visitor." My heart heart jumped, thinking it might be my mother. But it was Noor who walked in, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual loose dress and hijab. We hugged, crying. She told me about the chaos after the raids, families turning on each other, blaming each other for bringing scrutiny, my father maintaining his innocence, claiming I'd been brainwashed by Western ideology. But some of us are talking now, she said, the ones who survived. We're sharing our stories, supporting each other. Your courage started something. She pulled out a worn notebook. I've been documenting too. Names, dates, locations, girls who need help. We spent hours going through her notes, identifying the most at-risk girls. The network was larger than even I'd realized. Families across multiple states, all connected by blood and tradition, all perpetuating the same cycle. That night, I lay awake thinking about my mother's message, the tool shed, under the floorboard. What had she hidden there? More evidence? Money? Documents? I'd probably never know. The house was a crime scene now, and I couldn't go back. But knowing she'd prepared something, had thought ahead, gave me comfort. She'd been fighting this battle far longer than I'd realized, using the only weapons available to her: patience, deception, and meticulous documentation. My phone rang at dawn. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Sister? Anya's voice was barely a whisper. They're trying to take me back. My uncle came to the foster home. He says he has custody rights. My blood ran cold. Where are you now? Locked in the bathroom. The foster mom is arguing with him, but he has papers, legal documents. I alerted Sarah immediately. She called Agent Martinez while I stayed on the phone with Anya, telling her to stay put, that help was coming. I could hear shouting in the background, her uncle's voice demanding his property be returned. Property. That's all we were to them. The line went dead. I paced my room, helpless, imagining Anya being dragged back to a wedding that would destroy her. This was exactly what my father would try next. Legal maneuvers, custody claims, religious freedom arguments. Hours later, Agent Martinez called. Anya was safe. The uncle had been arrested for attempted kidnapping, but it was a warning. They wouldn't give up easily. That afternoon, the prosecutor visited with concerning news. Some family members had hired high-powered lawyers. They were challenging the removals, claiming religious persecution, arguing that the marriages were spiritual ceremonies, not legal ones. We need more witnesses, she said. More girls willing to testify. But I knew the price of speaking out. Not just losing family, but becoming a target. The community was close-knit, with reaches far beyond our city. Girls who spoke up could find themselves ostracized, threatened, or worse. Still, I agreed to testify. In court, in depositions, wherever needed. Because I thought of all the 11-year-olds staring at their bodies in mirrors, terrified of the changes that would seal their fate. The group home became my sanctuary, but also my prison. I couldn't go out without security protocols, couldn't use social media, couldn't contact friends from my old life. The isolation was suffocating, but necessary. One evening, a new girl arrived. Samira, 13, pulled from a home where her wedding was days away. She was terrified, convinced she'd doomed her family to hell by running away. I spent hours with her, sharing my story, showing her the legal documents that proved she had rights. Slowly, she began to understand that love didn't mean ownership, that tradition wasn't an excuse for abuse. But what about our culture? She asked one night. Are we just supposed to abandon everything? I thought carefully before answering. Culture isn't static, it evolves. Our grandmothers' grandmothers probably did things differently too. We can keep the beautiful parts, the food, the language, the art, the faith, but practices that hurt children, those aren't worth preserving. She nodded slowly, processing this new perspective. I saw myself in her confusion, the struggle to separate faith from tradition, love from control. Weeks turned into months. The legal cases progressed slowly. Some family members took plea deals, others fought tooth and nail. My father remained defiant, his lawyer arguing that arranging marriages was protected religious practice. I testified via video link, too dangerous to appear in person. I spoke about the beatings, the burns, the forced servitude, about girls married to men who already had wives, who treated them like servants and breeding stock. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a rebellious teenager influenced by Western propaganda, but I had dates, names, medical records my mother had secretly copied. I had the truth. During breaks, I thought about Hamoud Habibi. He'd vanished after the raids, probably fled to a country without extradition. 2 dead wives before 23. How many more girls would he go through if he wasn't stopped? The verdicts came down piecemeal. Some convictions, some acquittals. My father got 5 years for child endangerment. Not enough, but something. My uncles received various sentences. Some family members fled before trial. My mother was released to a protection program. We were allowed 1 supervised phone call. Her voice was different, lighter somehow. I'm sorry, she said. For all the years I couldn't protect you openly. You protected me the only way you could, I replied, understanding now the impossible position she'd been in. She told me about the tool shed, what she'd hidden. Money she'd skimmed from household funds over years. Documents proving the girls' ages, the men's previous marriages, contact information for an underground network of women who helped girls escape. I knew this day would come, she said. I just prayed you'd be strong enough when it did. I hung up the phone with trembling hands. My mother's voice still echoed in my ears, but the conversation had been cut short by the supervisor. 5 minutes was all we were allowed. The group home fell into its evening routine. Girls retreating to their rooms, Sarah making her rounds, checking locks and alarms. I helped Samira with her homework, explaining fractions while my mind churned with everything my mother had revealed. 3 sharp knocks interrupted us. Sarah's face appeared in the doorway, her expression tight with concern. She motioned for me to follow her to the office. A man in an expensive suit sat across from Sarah's desk, briefcase at his feet. My stomach dropped. I recognized the type immediately, the kind of lawyer my father would hire. He introduced himself as Mr. Frederick, representing the Hassan family. His smile never reached his eyes as he explained that my father had filed for emergency custody, claiming I'd been kidnapped and brainwashed. The paperwork looked official, stamped and notarized. Sarah examined the documents carefully while I sat frozen. Mr. Frederick continued talking about parental rights, religious freedom, the sanctity of family. His words blurred together as panic rose in my chest. The meeting lasted an hour. Sarah refused to release me, citing the protection order. Mr. Frederick left with promises to return with a court order. The moment the door closed, Sarah made several urgent phone calls. That night, sleep eluded me. Every car passing outside made me jump. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. I thought about my mother's hidden stash under the tool shed floorboards. Evidence she'd risked everything to gather. Evidence now trapped in a house I could never return to. Morning brought more lawyers, this time from our side. They explained that my father's team was challenging everything, the protection protection order, the custody arrangement, even the validity of my testimony. They'd hired experts to argue about cultural misunderstandings and religious persecution. I spent hours in preparation sessions, going over my story again and again. The lawyers warned me about trick questions, about how they'd try to make me seem ungrateful, rebellious, corrupted by Western values. They coached me on staying calm, sticking to facts, not getting emotional. But emotions were all I had. Rage at being treated like property, fear of being dragged back, guilt about the girls I'd left behind, hope that maybe, finally, things could change. Ms. Chen visited that afternoon, bringing news from the outside. 3 more families had lawyered up. The community was closing ranks, moving girls to relatives in other states. Some families had already left the country entirely. She showed me photos from her 3-year investigation, pictures of bruised arms, medical records from mysterious injuries, documentation of girls who'd vanished from school rolls. My mother had provided many of them, she explained. Secret photos taken during family gatherings, medical records smuggled out during doctor visits. The evidence was damning, but the legal battle would be long. Ms. Chen warned me to prepare for months, maybe years of court proceedings. The thought exhausted me. I was 15. I should be worried about homework and friends, not custody battles and forced marriages. That evening, Sarah gathered all the girls for a security briefing. There'd been suspicious cars circling the block, phone calls with no one speaking on the other end. We reviewed escape protocols, emergency contacts, what to do if someone tried to grab us. Samira clung to my arm during the meeting. She'd only been with us a week, still jumping at shadows. I remembered that feeling, the constant fear that they'd find a way to drag you back, the knowledge that family could be your greatest threat. After the meeting, I found myself in the kitchen with 2 other girls. McTheodore, 17, had run from an arranged marriage to her cousin. Margarita, 16, had escaped after her parents tried to send her overseas for a wedding. We didn't talk about our stories often, but that night we shared our fears. McTheodore showed us the scar on her shoulder from when she'd tried to run the first time. Margarita talked about her younger sisters, still trapped at home. I told them about the tool shed meetings, about teaching girls their rights in whispers. We made a pact that night. Whatever happened, we'd fight for the ones still trapped. We'd testify, speak out, risk everything to break the cycle. It felt like a small rebellion. 3 girls in a kitchen plotting to take down traditions centuries old. The next morning brought chaos. Agent Martinez called with urgent news. Several families were mobilizing, planning to move their daughters before more investigations could begin. They had intelligence about girls being prepared for quick marriages, documents being forged, travel plans being made. I gave her every name I could remember. Every family I knew followed the same traditions. Every girl who'd whispered fears to me at the mosque or family gatherings. The list was longer than I'd realized. Dozens of girls, maybe hundreds, all across the state and beyond. But resources were limited. They couldn't investigate everyone at once. They had to prioritize imminent threats, girls in immediate danger. The system that was supposed to protect us moved at a crawl while our families moved at lightning speed. Sarah increased security at the group home. New cameras, stronger locks, panic buttons in every room. She hired a security guard for overnight shifts. The house that had felt like a sanctuary began to feel like a fortress under siege. I threw myself into online school, desperate for distraction, but concentration was impossible. Every essay I wrote circled back to freedom. Every history lesson reminded me that people had always fought to own other people, calling it tradition, religion, natural order. 2 weeks passed in tense monotony. Then everything accelerated. It started with a phone call. Unknown number, but I recognized the breathing before she spoke. Layla, my 11-year-old cousin. Her whispered words sent ice through my veins. The family had moved up her timeline. She'd started showing signs of development. They were planning to claim she'd gotten her period, arrange a marriage before anyone could intervene. I immediately told Sarah, who called Agent Martinez, but Layla didn't know where they were taking her. Somewhere out of state she'd overheard, somewhere safe from interference. The call cut off abruptly. Someone had caught her. The helplessness burned. My little cousin, who'd sat in the tool shed learning about her rights, was being prepared for sale, and I was trapped in a group home, unable to do anything but make phone calls to overworked agents. That night, I made a decision. I called the prosecutor and volunteered to testify publicly. No more video links, no more hiding. If my family wanted to claim this was about religious freedom, I'd show the world what their religion really protected. The prosecutor tried to talk me out of it. The danger was too great. But I thought of Layla, of Samira, of all the girls whose periods would come tomorrow or next week or next month. Someone had to speak for them. The announcement of public testimony sent shockwaves through the community. My phone exploded with messages, some supportive, from girls who'd escaped or women who'd survived, but most were threats, promises of retribution, reminders of what happened to girls who betrayed their families. Sarah confiscated my phone for my own safety, but the damage was done. They knew I was going to speak. They knew I had evidence, stories, names. The community that had protected these practices for generations was about to be exposed. Mr. Frederick returned with reinforcements. 3 lawyers now, armed with motions and injunctions. They claimed I was being coerced, that the testimony was coached, that I was too young to understand the consequences of my actions. The irony wasn't lost on me. Too young to testify about my own life, but old enough to be married to a man who'd unalived 2 wives. Too young to speak in court, but old enough to bear children for a stranger. The legal maneuvering intensified. My father's team filed motion after motion, challenges to evidence, demands for psychological evaluations, claims of parental alienation. They threw everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. Meanwhile, the prosecutor built her case methodically. She had my testimony, my mother's evidence, Ms. Chen's 3-year investigation, but she needed more. She needed other girls to come forward, to corroborate the pattern of abuse. Slowly, they did. McTheodore agreed to testify about her experience. 2 girls from other families came forward. Noor, despite the risk to her own safety, provided detailed documentation about her marriage at 14. But for every girl who spoke up, 3 more disappeared. Families scattered like roaches when the light turned on. Girls vanished from schools, from doctors' offices, from the mosque. The community was in full damage control mode. I started working with the prosecutor on my testimony. Hours of preparation, going over every detail. She warned me about what to expect. The defense would attack my character, my motives, my mental state. They'd paint me as a rebellious teenager who destroyed her family for attention. The stress began to show. I lost more weight, despite Sarah's efforts to make me eat. Nightmares plagued my sleep. Sometimes I woke up thinking I was back in my father's house, that the escape had been been a dream. Samira became my shadow, following me everywhere. She'd started opening up about her own story. The beatings when she'd resisted learning wife duties. The burns on her feet from standing on hot coals. Punishment for speaking back. The promise that her wedding night would teach her proper submission. We spent evenings teaching each other. I helped with her English. She taught me traditional songs her grandmother had sung. We reclaimed the beautiful parts of our culture while rejecting the chains. It was our own quiet revolution. Agent Martinez visited with updates on the investigation. They'd found more evidence in raids on other homes. Financial records showing bride prices. Medical records of injuries. Photos of child brides. The network was vast, interconnected, protected by silence and fear, but they'd also hit walls. Many families had destroyed evidence. Others had moved it offshore. Girls who might have testified were nowhere to be found. The community had decades of practice in hiding their crimes. I thought often about my mother during those weeks. Her years of secret documentation, her careful balance between protection and preparation. She'd known this day would come, had prepared for it like a general planning a war. I wished I could talk to her, ask her how she'd found the strength to play along for so long. The security guard reported more suspicious activity. Cars with tinted windows parking across the street. Men photographing the house from different angles. Sarah filed police reports, but without concrete threats. There was little they could do. One morning, I woke to commotion. Margarita's bed was empty, her window open. Panic gripped the house as Sarah called police. Security footage showed a van pulling up at 3 a.m., Margarita climbing in voluntarily. Hours later, we learned the truth. Her family had gotten to her. Promises of forgiveness, of canceling the marriage, of letting her finish school. Lies wrapped in love, the most effective chains of all. By noon, she was on a plane to Pakistan. Her betrayal hit hard. Not because she'd left, but because I understood. The pull of family, the hope that maybe they'd change, the exhaustion of fighting, we all felt it. The difference was, some of us had learned that hope could unalive you. Sarah tightened security again. No more phone calls without supervision. No internet access without monitoring. No visitors without extensive background checks. The freedom we'd fought for was shrinking, replaced by necessary precautions. I channeled my frustration into preparation. If I couldn't save Margarita or find Layla, I could at least make my testimony count. I practiced with the prosecutor until every word was perfect. Dates, names, specific incidents. The truth as armor against their lies. Ms. Chen brought news that lifted my spirits slightly. Anya was thriving in her placement. She'd started school, made friends, begun therapy. She sent a message through Ms. Chen, thanking me for the notebook that had saved her life. But for every success, there were failures. Girls we couldn't reach in time. Families that disappeared completely. The prosecutor warned me not to expect total victory. Some would escape justice. Some girls would remain trapped. Change would come slowly, incrementally. I understood, but it didn't ease the burning in my chest. Every day of delay meant another girl married off, another childhood destroyed, another life reduced to property. The system's slow grind was its own kind of violence. 3 months into my stay, unexpected news arrived. My mother had agreed to testify, not publicly, but in depositions. Her evidence would be crucial, the prosecutor explained. An insider's perspective, years of documentation, proof that even the women enforcing the rules knew they were wrong. I was allowed another phone call with her. This time she told me about her own marriage at 13, about losing her first baby at 14, about watching her daughters grow up and promising herself it would be different for us, even as she played the perfect traditional wife. She'd started documenting when I was 5. Every bruise, every punishment, every girl who disappeared into marriage. She'd taught herself to use hidden cameras, to copy documents, to build an evidence trail, all while smiling and serving tea and pretending to support it all. Her sacrifice humbled me. I'd fought for a few years. She'd fought for decades, in silence, in isolation, with no guarantee it would matter. She'd been the first rebel in our family, hidden in plain sight. The call ended too soon, but her words stayed with me. She'd told me to be strong, to speak truth, to remember that breaking chains was never easy, that sometimes the first generation only loosened them, and the next would break them entirely. I returned to preparation with renewed determination. The prosecutor showed me the defense's strategy. They'd claim cultural misunderstanding. They'd argue that arranged marriage wasn't forced marriage. They'd paint our traditions as beautiful, corrupted by Western influence. But I had the truth. The burns on my hands from holding hot pots, the scars on my back from belt lashes, the memories of cousins disappearing into houses they'd never leave. No cultural explanation could justify that. The trial date approached like a storm on the horizon. The community's efforts to stop it intensified. More lawyers joined my father's team. Respected community leaders wrote letters about religious persecution. They organized protests outside the courthouse. Sarah prepared us for the media attention. Reporters had started calling, wanting interviews. She declined them all. Our stories weren't entertainment. They were evidence, and evidence needed to be protected until trial. But word spread anyway. Social media picked up fragments. Advocacy groups reached out offering support. The story was bigger than just our family now. It was about systems of oppression hidden in plain sight, protected by claims of religious freedom. I watched the coverage with mixed feelings. Grateful for attention that might save other girls. Terrified of the spotlight that made me a bigger target. Angry that it took extreme cases to make people care about what happened in ordinary houses every day. The defense made one last push. A generous offer, Mr. Frederick explained. Drop the testimony, return home, and all would be forgiven. The marriage to Hamoud would be cancelled. I could finish school, choose my own husband when I was older. My father would even pay for college. I almost laughed, as if I could trust promises from people who saw me as property. As if education meant anything when you could be sold at any moment. As if choosing between approved cousins at 18 was better than being sold at 15. Sarah witnessed my refusal. Mr. Frederick left with barely concealed fury. The message was clear. They'd tried carrots. Now would come sticks. That night, I sat with Samira and McTheodore in the common room. We talked about the future. Not the immediate future of trials and testimony, but the distant future of freedom. McTheodore wanted to be a social worker. Samira dreamed of teaching. I hadn't decided yet, but I knew it would involve helping girls like us. We made plans like normal teenagers. College applications, career goals, dreams of apartments and independence. It felt revolutionary, planning futures that belonged to us alone. The next morning, Sarah woke me early. There'd been an incident. Someone had thrown a brick through the window of the prosecutor's office. Attached was a note. Drop the case or the girls pay. Security increased again. Police patrols, federal marshals. The group home became a bunker, but I refused to be terrorized into silence. Every threat threat proved why testimony was necessary. They wouldn't fight so hard if they weren't guilty. I spent my last weeks of preparation going over everything one final time. The prosecutor coached me on staying calm under cross-examination. She showed me photos of the courtroom, where I'd sit, where my father would be. She prepared me for seeing him again. The night before trial, I couldn't sleep. I thought about all the girls depending on my words. Layla, wherever they'd hidden her. Anya, safe but scarred. Margarita, trapped in Pakistan. My mother, who'd risked everything to gather evidence. Miriam, who'd died at 15. Morning came whether I was ready or not. Sarah helped me dress in the conservative outfit the prosecutor had chosen. Nothing that could be used against me. Nothing that suggested Western corruption. Just a girl telling the truth. The drive to the courthouse passed in a blur. Federal marshals escorted us through a side entrance, avoiding the protesters out front. Their chants followed us inside, some supporting us, others damning us for betraying our culture. Inside the courthouse, the prosecutor gave me final instructions. Speak clearly, take my time, ask for breaks if needed. Remember that truth was my shield. She squeezed my shoulder, and then it was time. The courtroom doors opened. I saw my father for the first time in months. He sat at the defense table, surrounded by lawyers wearing his best suit. His eyes found mine, still promising retribution. But I was no longer the scared girl in his house. I walked to the witness stand with my head high. The bailiff swore me in. The prosecutor approached with an encouraging smile, and I began to speak the truth that would either free us or destroy us. But that's a story for another day. I walked to the witness stand with my head high. The bailiff swore me in. The prosecutor approached with an encouraging smile, and I began to speak the truth that would either free us or destroy us. The courtroom felt smaller than I'd imagined. My father sat 20 feet away, close enough that I could see the muscle twitching in his jaw. His lawyers flanked him like guards, their expressions carefully neutral. Behind them, rows of family members filled the gallery. Some I recognized, others were strangers who shared our blood and our secrets. The prosecutor started with simple questions. My name, my age, where I'd lived. Each answer built the foundation for what was coming. I kept my voice steady, focusing on the wall clock above the jury box. Time moved differently here, each second stretching like taffy. When she asked about the Friday morning sessions, I described them matter-of-factly. The pre-dawn wake-ups, the silent service, the punishments for making eye contact. I showed the faint scars on my palms from holding burning pots. The defense objected repeatedly, but the judge allowed my testimony to continue. My father's face remained stone throughout. Only his hands betrayed him, clenching and unclenching on the table. I wondered if he was remembering those same mornings, if he felt any doubt about what he'd done, but his eyes, when they met mine, held only fury. The prosecutor moved to the toolshed meetings. I explained how I'd taught younger cousins about their rights, about mandatory reporters, about escape routes. The defense attorney scribbled notes furiously. I knew they'd use this against me, paint me as a manipulator who'd corrupted innocent girls. During the lunch recess, Sarah stayed close. Federal marshals escorted us to a secure room where I picked at a sandwich. My hands shook too badly to eat. Through the window, I could see protesters on the courthouse steps, their signs blurred together, but I caught fragments. Religious freedom and protect our daughters, battling for space. The afternoon session focused on specific incidents. The prosecutor showed photos of injuries, medical records, documentation my mother had gathered. Each piece of evidence felt like a small victory, proof that our suffering hadn't been invisible, that someone had been watching, recording, preparing for this moment. Cross-examination came like a storm. The defense attorney, a woman with perfectly styled hair and cold eyes, approached with a sympathetic smile that never wavered. She asked about my grades, my behavior at school, my relationship with my parents before the misunderstanding. She painted a picture of a rebellious teenager, influenced by Western values, who destroyed a loving family over cultural differences. She suggested I'd been coached, that my testimony was rehearsed, that I'd been promised rewards for cooperating with authorities. I answered each question simply, sticking to facts. When she implied I'd exaggerated the burns, I showed my palms again. When she suggested the Friday sessions were simply teaching hospitality, I described the belt lashes for making noise. When she claimed the marriages were spiritual ceremonies, not legal contracts, I recited the ages of cousins who'd been married, the age gaps with their husbands, the pregnancies that followed too quickly. The judge called a recess when one of my uncles stood up shouting about family honor. As marshals removed him, his words echoed through the courtroom. Threats wrapped in religious language. Promises of what happened to girls who forgot their place. That evening, back at the group home, exhaustion hit like a physical weight. Sarah ran a bath while I sat on my bed, still in the conservative courtroom outfit. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more attacks on my character, more attempts to twist the truth. Samira knocked softly and entered with tea. She'd watched the news coverage, seen the protesters, heard the community leaders defending our traditions on camera. Her face showed the same mix of hope and fear I felt. We were challenging something bigger than our individual families. We were threatening an entire system. The next days blurred together. More testimony from other girls, each story reinforcing the pattern. McTheodore described her attempted escape, the beating that followed, the scar that proved it. Two cousins testified via video link, too frightened to appear in person. Their voices shook as they described marriages arranged before they'd even started high school. My mother's deposition was read into evidence. Her words, clinical and precise, documented years of abuse disguised as tradition. She'd photographed bruises, recorded conversations, kept meticulous notes. The defense tried to discredit her, suggesting mental illness, coercion, a bitter woman's revenge, but the evidence spoke louder than their theories. Agent Martinez testified about the investigation, the raids, the evidence collected, financial records showing bride prices, medical records of girls injured by much older husbands, death certificates of child brides who hadn't survived their pregnancies. The numbers painted a picture of systematic abuse spanning generations. Ms. Chen took the stand with her 3 years of documentation, photos of underweight girls, records of students who'd vanished from school, suspicious injuries explained away as accidents. She'd built her case carefully, methodically, waiting for the right moment to act. The defense brought their own witnesses, community leaders who spoke of beautiful traditions, of loving families, of girls who were cherished and protected. They painted our testimony as lies, exaggerations, misunderstandings born of cultural confusion. They claimed we'd been brainwashed by Western feminism, that we'd abandoned our faith and our families for false promises of freedom. One afternoon, unexpected drama erupted. Margarita's parents appeared in court claiming she'd been kidnapped, not rescued. They produced documents, photos of a happy family. Letters supposedly written by Margarita begging to come home. The prosecutor fought to exclude the evidence, arguing Margarita was already out of the country, unable to verify or deny the claims. The judge allowed limited testimony. Margarita's mother wept on the stand, describing her daughter's rebellion, her corruption by bad influences, her rejection of family values. It was a performance, but an effective one. I saw doubt creep into some jurors' faces. That night, I lay awake replaying the day. Had we made a mistake going public? Were we destroying families that might have changed on their own? But then I remembered Miriam, dead at 15, Layla, vanished to who knows where, the countless girls who'd never get the chance to speak. The trial stretched into its second week. The prosecution presented expert witnesses who explained the psychological damage of child marriage, the physical dangers of early pregnancy, the long-term effects of systematic abuse. The defense countered with their own experts who spoke of cultural relativism, religious freedom, the danger of imposing Western values on immigrant communities. Through it all, my father remained silent. He never took a stand, never spoke except to his lawyers, but his presence filled the courtroom like smoke. During breaks, family members would approach him, whispering urgently. Plans were being made, I knew. Win or lose in court, this wasn't over. One morning, Sarah woke me with urgent news. There'd been an incident at another group home. A girl preparing to testify had vanished in the night. Security footage showed her leaving voluntarily, getting into a car with family members. Another one lost to promises and threats. Love and fear twisted together. The news shook our house. We all knew it could have been any of us. The pull of family never fully went away. Even as I testified about abuse, part of me mourned the family I'd lost. The mother who'd hidden her rebellion for decades, the cousins I'd tried to save, even my father, or at least the father I'd wished he could be. The prosecutor presented closing arguments with passionate precision. She laid out the evidence piece by piece, building a case that these weren't isolated incidents but systematic crimes. She reminded the jury that religious freedom didn't include the freedom to abuse children, that cultural traditions couldn't override basic human rights. The defense painted a different picture. Loving families torn apart by misunderstandings, girls influenced by outside forces to reject their heritage, a community under attack for practicing their faith. They asked the jury to consider the destruction of families, the loss of tradition, the danger of cultural imperialism. Jury deliberations began on a Thursday. We waited at the group home, phones silent, news channels muted. Sarah tried to maintain normal routines, but tension filled every room. McTheodore paced endlessly. Samira barely ate. I found myself at the window, watching cars pass, wondering if one might carry family members coming for us. The call came Friday afternoon. The jury had reached a verdict. We dressed carefully, Sarah checking and rechecking security arrangements. The drive to the courthouse felt both endless and too quick. Protesters had multiplied, their chants growing louder as our van approached. Inside the courtroom, I took my seat behind the prosecutor. My father entered with his lawyers, his face unreadable. Family members filled the gallery, their whispers creating a low hum of anticipation. The judge called for order. The jury filed in, avoiding eye contact with both sides. The foreman stood, paper trembling in his hands, guilty on multiple counts of child endangerment, guilty of conspiracy to commit forced marriage. The list continued, each verdict a small victory and a family destroyed. My father's composure finally cracked. He turned to stare at me, his face twisted with rage and something else. Betrayal? Grief? The marshals moved closer as he half rose from his chair. His lawyers pulled him back down, whispering urgently. Sentencing would come later, the judge announced. Other family members faced separate trials. The system would grind on, slow but inexorable. As marshals led my father away, he spoke for the first time, his voice carrying across the courtroom, words in Arabic that made my mother's relatives flinch. A father's curse, irrevocable and ancient. Outside the courthouse, chaos reigned. Reporters shouted questions we'd been instructed not to answer. Protesters pressed against police barriers. Sarah and the marshals formed a protective circle, moving us quickly to the waiting van. Through the tinted windows, I saw families divided, some celebrating, others mourning, all of us forever changed. Back at the group home, exhaustion hit like a wave. The other girls surrounded us with questions and congratulations. McTheodore cried for the first time since I'd met her. Samira hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. We'd won something, though none of us were quite sure what. That night, Agent Martinez called with updates. Several family members had fled before their trials. Others were negotiating plea deals. The investigation had expanded to other states, other communities. Our testimony had opened doors that couldn't be closed again, but there were losses too. 3 more girls had vanished from protective custody across the country. Families closing ranks, moving their daughters beyond reach. For every girl we'd saved, others disappeared into marriages that would never be reported, abuse that would never be documented. I thought about Layla constantly, my 11-year-old cousin who'd called for help too late. Was she married now, pregnant, or hidden away somewhere, waiting for her body to betray her into womanhood? The not knowing burned worse than any certainty. A week after the verdict, unexpected news arrived. Hamoud Habibi had been arrested trying to enter the country under a false name. He faced charges related to his previous wives' deaths. Investigations reopened in light of our trial. It wasn't justice for the girls he'd unalived, but it was something. My mother remained in protective custody, her location secret even from me. We were allowed one more phone call. She told me she was proud, that I'd done what she'd never had the courage to do. I told her she'd been brave in her own way, fighting a silent war for decades. We both cried, knowing we might never see each other again. The group home slowly returned to routine. New girls arrived, each with their own story of escape. We welcomed them with the knowledge of what they'd face, the long legal battles, the family they'd lose, the freedom that came with such a heavy price. I started speaking at training sessions for social workers and law enforcement, not publicly, but in secure locations, teaching them what to look for, how to help girls like us. I shared the signs I'd hidden, the words that might save a life, the careful balance between cultural sensitivity and child protection. McTheodore aged out of the system first. She'd been accepted to college with a full scholarship, planning to study social work. The night before she left, we sat in the kitchen where we'd first shared our stories. She promised to fight for girls like us, to use her freedom to free others. Samira started high school, the first in her family to attend past 8th grade. She struggled with English but excelled in math and science. Sometimes I caught her staring at her reflection, marveling at the simple freedom of choosing her own clothes, her own path, her own future. The trials continued for months. Some convictions, some acquittals. Justice served imperfectly, but served nonetheless. Each verdict rippled through the community. Some families quietly abandoned the practice, frightened by consequences. Others dug in deeper, moving further underground. I testified in 3 more trials, each time facing family members who'd once claimed to love me. An uncle who'd taught me to ride a bike, an aunt who'd braided my hair for Eid, cousins I'd played with as children, all of them choosing tradition over truth, family honor over children's lives. Between court appearances, life developed its own rhythm. Online school in the morning, therapy in the afternoon, homework in the evening, small freedoms that felt revolutionary, choosing what to eat, when to sleep, how to spend an hour of free time. Every decision a tiny rebellion against the life planned for me. News filtered in slowly about the wider investigation, arrests in other states, girls rescued from planned marriages, families under scrutiny. Our case had set precedents, created pathways for prosecution. It wasn't the sweeping change we'd hoped for, but it was movement in the right direction. 6 months after the trial, Sarah told me about a new placement, a foster family experienced with girls from similar backgrounds. The transition felt like another loss, leaving the safety of the group home, the girls who'd become my sisters in survival, but it was also a step toward something resembling normal life. The foster family lived in a different state, far from anyone who might recognize me. They had strict security protocols, but also warm patience, understanding. The mother had escaped an arranged marriage herself decades ago. She knew the weight of what we carried. I started regular school for the first time in over a year. The normalcy felt surreal. Homework and friend drama and complaints about cafeteria food. I kept my story private, just another teenager navigating high school. Only the foster family knew why I sometimes froze at certain sounds, why I checked locks obsessively, why I couldn't bear tight spaces. Letters arrived occasionally through official channels, some from girls who'd escaped after hearing about our case, others from women who'd survived similar childhoods, offering support and hope. Each letter reminded me that our fight had meaning beyond our individual freedom. The anniversary of my escape approached with unexpected emotions, grief for the family I'd lost. Even as I celebrated the freedom I'd gained, I thought about my mother often, wondering where she was, if she was safe, if she ever regretted the choices that had led us here. That night, I sat at my desk in my foster family's home, working on a college essay about overcoming challenges. How could I explain that my greatest challenge had been surviving my own family's love, that freedom had required destroying everything I'd been taught to value, that every day of normal life was a victory against generations of tradition? I wrote about resilience instead, about finding strength in unexpected places, about the power of education to change lives, safe, sanitized versions of truth that college admissions officers could digest. The real story lived in my scars, my nightmares, my reflexive lynch when anyone raised their voice. As I finished the essay, my foster mother knocked gently. Dinner was ready, she said. The family was waiting. I saved my work and headed downstairs, toward the simple miracle of a meal where I could speak freely, eat what I chose, exist as more than property. The kitchen was warm with cooking smells and conversation. My foster siblings chattered about school and sports and weekend plans, normal teenage concerns that I was slowly learning to share. I took my place at the table, no longer serving in silence but participating as an equal. This was freedom, not grand or dramatic, but quiet and daily. The freedom to choose my own path, make my own mistakes, build my own future. It had cost everything, but as I sat with my chosen family, laughing at a silly joke, I knew it had been worth it. Some chains take generations to break. My mother had loosened them. I had shattered them. And somewhere, in group homes and foster families and secret shelters, other girls were finding their own strength to resist. The cycle was breaking, slowly but surely, one brave girl at a time.